Let's get into that, Dom. So Islam Makhachev looking to make the first defense of his lightweight title. But in order to do so, he'll have to go through the featherweight champion, the pound for pound number one fighter in the UFC, Alexander Volkanovski. He is moving up in weight, looking to become champ. That would make him that'd make him the fifth fighter, right?
Mm, it's got to be around that number. Let's see.
Because
Connor,
you had Connor,
DC.
you had Cejudo, Amanda, DC. I think that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if you include just two division titles, you got Randy Couture. Did BJ Penn do it? I don't know. It's fifth
GSP.
simultaneous. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yep, GSP. So fifth simultaneous. That'd be a massive milestone. He's already very close, if not already there, to like best featherweight of all time.
Hmm.
And this would be just another step in a direction of not just being the best featherweight of time, but maybe being one of the best fighters of
Yeah.
all time, Dominic. So, in order to do so, though, he's going to have to get through Islam, who, even though he's not even made a defense of his title yet, he's already got the cause of being the next great in this lightweight division that's had so many great fighters. Yes, of course, he comes from a great camp. He is the protege of Habib Nurmagomedov, another all-time great. But Islam Makhachev is also just that dude. And you look at what he did to Charles Oliveira, how thorough of a beating he really put on a guy who had yet to really fall victim to that in such a great reign he had as champion. Islam has the makings of a special talent.
Hmm.
So this is a massive fight for all those reasons. Yet, as we're just a couple days away from fight night, Dom, there's been a lot of talk about this fight, but not for the X's and O's or what are the implications of a win for either guy here. The talk seems to be focused around the promotion of this fight, or dare I say, lack thereof. Now, this
Hmm.
is something we have constantly thrown eggs at to our competitors over at Bellator. Not our competitors, but the UFC's competitors.
Hmm.
We've constantly talked about their under promoting of fights. So I think it's only right that now that people are calling out the UFC for the same thing, we address it here first before we even get into the fight, Dom. Your thoughts on this debate? It all started with Islam actually calling out the company directly.
Yeah.
So, do you agree with these calls for this being an underpromoted fight? Or do you tend to side with more the UFC that they are either doing enough or maybe there's other reasons for why this is being underpromoted?
I think that for a fight of this magnitude, it is definitely being underpromoted. However, the way that the UFC promotes, and it's pretty consistent for the most part, is that you basically it's a 1 week thing in terms of like blasting on social media and whatnot. Now you will get ads on like ESPN on TV for pay-per-views more than a week out. Obviously, I have seen ads for this, but in terms of like a social media presence, I feel like it's relatively consistent that the UFC they hammer it from 1 week out, from Monday to Saturday is when they just start to drill it. So in that instance, I think it's pretty much the same. But when there's a fight like this, an exception like this, dare I say, we're talking not only champion versus champion, we're talking number one pound for pound versus number two pound for pound. This is historic stuff that is very, very rare in the sport. Like, yes, we get great fighters that fight great fighters for titles and stuff all the time in MMA, in the UFC specifically. But then this is just the highest echelon that you get, the highest level that you can get to. So yeah, I think it definitely has deserved more. I just don't know how the UFC would have necessarily went about doing it differently than what they do traditionally. You know what I mean? That's kind of where I have found myself in the middle of all this on Twitter and whatnot this past week and a half.
Yeah, this is a problem. Depending on how you look at it, it's a problem for a while, and it just took this type of fight to kind of shine a light on it. The UFC is so big at this point. They are such a big part of this sport. I mean, they are MMA in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
That just announcing that there's a fight and it's under the UFC umbrella, that's sometimes just enough. You
Yeah.
know, there's not a whole lot special that they either one need to do or two that they do to kind of make these fights feel different on their own. Now you'll see certain fighters will take it upon themselves to try to raise the stakes for their fight, get more interest in their fights, and some have worked out. I think that's why we get pretty hard on like Bellator, is because they're already working from behind, but I
Yeah.
feel like they promote at almost they do the same things that the UFC do, but have none of the resources and none of the outlets that are as near as big as like an ESPN
Right.
to carry them.
Yeah.
So they need to do more. The
Yeah.
UFC doesn't need to do more, but it does expose a little bit of how they operate when a fight that in a lot of ways is massive in terms of legacy feels like just another pay-per-view.
Hmm.
And some in it when you ask her, the question has to be like, what would they do different? What would I have them do differently? And
Hmm.
that's a really good question because I don't really have much of an answer for that. And then I kind of think long and hard, Dom, and I'm like, well, what exactly are Islam and Volkanovski doing to make this feel
Hmm.
like a bigger fight? And not necessarily Volkanovski. Volkanovski seems to be fine. You know, he's just happy to be in this
Yeah.
spot.
Yeah.
But Islam's the one that was complaining about it. So my question would
Yeah.
be, what is he doing to make this fight feel bigger?
Yeah.
Now, I don't blame him for not resorting to any sort of tactics that other fighters would go to that maybe
Right.
would feel like some sort of compromise on his character or who he
Right.
is. I have nothing but respect for that. But also, you can't just say my fight needs to be more promoted. But what can they do? Like Islam and Volkanovski especially has the track record to prove he's not exactly a big pay per view commodity right now.
Right.
Islam's had one main event on pay per view. I mean, I think UFC 280 did okay. It was
Hmm.
280, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it did okay, but I don't think it was necessarily like bringing the house down. And also, I don't think Islam would have been the reason it was doing so to begin with. So yes, he has the room to grow into like a pay per view star, like a Habib did.
Hmm.
But let's face it, Habib really only got to that point because of the rivalry with Conor McGregor. I mean, he
Hmm.
really did get a rub of from Conor that made him a massive pay per view star. He
Right.
probably wouldn't have reached that kind of height if not for that rivalry.
Hmm.
Islam doesn't necessarily have that yet. This fight with Volkanovski, they're very cordial for the most part. Like there's a little bit of talk here and there, but it's mostly nothing. And that's great. I think that the legacy implications of it's kind of speak for itself. But no, this isn't going to be a fight that's going to break a million pay per view buys. It's going to be lucky to break 450,000. And that's a
Hmm.
shame. But ultimately, this is a fight for the hardcore fans, anyways. Because, Dominic, let's
Yeah.
face it, nobody really cares about pound for pound rankings. I mean, to be clear,
Yeah.
like hardcore fans already don't like pound for pound rankings, at least the way the UFC does them.
Hmm.
So you take casual fans, they
Yeah.
don't give two shits about that.
Right.
So if hardcore fans don't care, how do you expect casual fans to care? So this whole number one versus number two pound for pound, I think it's lost on a lot of people.
Hmm.
You know, it just they don't really like what. Okay, who are these guys? Why do I care? We know why we care. We know how
Right.
big this is for their legacy. But
Right.
in order to grab casuals, you got to have more, I guess, juice that more on the surface than
Yeah.
you know. The more you dig into this fight, the bigger you realize it is. But it's hard to see on the surface
Right.
why it matters so much. So that's kind of my 2 cents, Dominic. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that before we kind of talk about the actual fight itself?
Phew, I feel like you took what I said and then just elaborated on it, added in your own 2 cents. I'm fine with where we end it.
Yeah. So hopefully we did that justice. I mean, we don't want to focus on it necessarily because we don't want to be a part of the problem here. You know, we
Right.
we want
Yeah.
to actually talk up this fight because it is big,
Yeah.
but you do also have to kind of address it since that's been the biggest talking point of
Yeah.
fight week. So, with that being said, it's a massive fight, and it is. I go back to what we talked about 3, 4 months ago. The clip. It's probably our biggest clip ever across any of our
Mm-hmm.
socials. Us talking about when this fight got announced. And I went back and watched it just to kind of remember
Freshen
what we
up.
said. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was Dominic clearly bought in immediately on the hype and the implications of this
Mm-hmm.
fight. You raised a question. Is this, and I'm going to butcher the exact wording, but
I'll help
is
you.
this the biggest the biggest title fight in UFC history in terms of like legacy? I believe that's somewhat what you said, right?
Is it the biggest first title defense for a new
Oh, there we
champion?
go. Yeah. So, and I think my rebuttal was that I would take like a Connor versus Eddie Alvarez at UFC
Right.
205.
Yeah.
Even though you were specifically talking about legacy, I was looking at it like the full enchilada. You know,
Of
the
course.
pay per view buys were obviously bigger. The the time period, considering first event at MSG, and you know, just all the things that went into getting MMA legalized in New York,
Mm-hmm.
the star power of Conor McGregor, the first guy going for two belts simultaneously. It was just really massive. So
Yeah.
I still stand by that. I would put that as like the number one. But honestly, Dom, I got it was a mixed bag of
Yeah.
responses to that. I think a lot of people didn't like it. They didn't like the take that Connor and Eddie was bigger. I was getting kind of flamed a little bit in the comments, and yeah, there was some people that came to my side to
Mm-hmm.
back me up, but I can see though that there is a rabid amount of people that think like this is the fight for a lot of people, and
Mm-hmm.
it deserves that kind of respect. We can split hairs on which fight's the biggest first title defense, which fight is the biggest this or that. But on its surface, on its
Yeah.
face value, it is one of the biggest fights of all time in terms of
Yeah.
legacy. We've talked about
Yeah.
that before. Other fights that were underappreciated but were impacting fights. DC versus Stipe 3, we
Yes.
said was to determine the best UFC heavyweight of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So Dominic, your thoughts on that original video we did when the fight was announced? Has anything changed for you 3 4 months later, or are you still all in on this fight?
I'm definitely still all in. I'm probably honestly even a little bit more excited despite all the promotional stuff we were just talking about because we know as hardcore fans and people that live and breathe the sport and follow it every day, this is a massive fight. We're talking a brand new champion but in Islam Makhachev that a lot of people kind of were just waiting. They were just waiting to see when that gold belt would be wrapped around his waist. He goes out there and disposes of Charles Oliveira, the hottest fighter in the UFC at that current point, and did it with relative ease on the feet and on the ground to become the champion. Now, on an 11 fight win streak, 5 straight wins, Noah, via finish, which, by the way, shuts down any narrative. If it's even still out there of people thinking Islam's a boring fighter, that's just very far fetched from the truth. Making his first title defense against a man who has won 22 straight fights, who is 12-0 in the UFC, who's made 4 title defenses at 145 pounds, beat one of, if not, he's probably not even viewed as the best now, but at one point he probably was. Max Holloway 3 times. Alexander Volkanovski is as good a talent that we've ever seen in the UFC. Honestly, he's still underappreciated. I was in that camp once, Noah. I look back when this podcast started and how damn it, he beat Max. Is one of my favorite fighters. I can't like this guy. He's good, but I'm not going to side with him. Every fight since this podcast has been going, and you could probably go back and see the progression of my fandom for Volkanovski. He is an amazing generational talent. His fight IQ, his just everything, the way in which he moves about, the way that he presents himself as an athlete and ambassador for the sport. This is 2 phenomenal fighters coming together to determine who right now is the best mixed martial artist on the planet. That's what this fight is. And it just so happens that if one man wins, he kind of cements his protege status and then can now chase Habib Nurmagomedov and Islam Makhachev for Volkanovski, if he goes and gets a second title up a weight class, something that not many people have done, especially at the same time. What would it be? 5 is what we said. It's just historic stuff. We don't see things like this. That's why, whether you're on the side of it being underappreciated, underpromoted or not, you got to just come together on Saturday, sit down and enjoy this, because it's 25 minutes that we won't get again for a very long time.
33 combined wins for these two as they step
insane.
into the cage Saturday. Yeah. That's not a small amount, Dom.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew that, but 33 in MMA is not a small number.
Yeah.
And what I want to say, I guess, on top, so regarding my thoughts, I again, a lot of the clip was focused on kind of, is it the biggest first title defense in history or not? I don't know if this was in that clip, but I remember talking about this at that time on that episode. And I made the prediction that I thought Islam Makhachev's going to essentially roll Volkanovski here.
Mm-hmm.
As good as Volkanovski was, I said, I think Islam's going to kind of run through him. I think it's going to, not that Volkanovski can't, make a better account of himself than like Charles did, but that at the end of the day, I thought Islam was going to make this look pretty clean.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone back a little bit on that. And actually what's funny is I've seen a lot of people predicting that very thing.
I have seen that, yeah.
I mean, just look at the odds. Volkanovski is a plus 300.
Yeah.
Makhachev minus 400. I mean, by the way, that's a weird favorite underdog split there. I don't know why. That feels like, I feel like at a minus 400, Volkanovski should be a bigger underdog, but I don't like if that's the way you're going to do it. But obviously they want to make sure to limit the amount of money people are getting either which way. So I guess where my thoughts have changed, Dom, is I was looking through the resume of Islam Makhachev, and people don't like it when I talk about, the lack of top tier guys that he's beaten. People don't like it when you say that, and that's not really what I'm going to say. Because I understand it's not his fault. He's tried to step up and take some of these fights like RDA and others, and it's just not happened. But the guys he has beaten, Charles Oliveira, who obviously how highly I think of him and how much that win did to kind of impact my thoughts on Islam as a fighter. But before that, the Bobby Greens, the Dan Hookers, the Drew Dobers, the Thiago Moises of the world, these are all good fighters. These are all quality wins. Charles kind of separating from the rest of the pack here. But the rest of these guys, and then, of course, Arman early on in their careers, that's a quality win, even though they were both very young. Right. What I think has been common through most of Islam's wins, and we'll go past the Arman fight because I don't think that really – it's really this run the last couple years is what I'm focused on.
Yeah.
What's been very prevalent through a lot of his opponents have been either they have pretty glaring weaknesses that he's been able to exploit, or they are fighters that make mistakes. You look at like Drew Dober clearly had a weakness in his grappling, wrestling, and Islam able to exploit that. Thiago Moises is a great submission practitioner, but doesn't have the wrestling or the strength to handle a guy like Islam. Bobby Green, a little bit weaker on the ground. Dan Hooker, same thing. Charles Oliveira, very talented everywhere. And that's why I was so confident that he was going to win that fight. Right. But what had made Charles's run so exciting and also had made it so kind of anxiety-inducing was that he made a lot of mistakes in his fights. And he just always found a way to clear his head, to make the adjustments, and come out looking like $1 million. Right. Alexander Volkanovski does not make mistakes, Dom. He doesn't
really
make mistakes at all.
Yeah.
And he forces you to react throughout the entire fight. He is constantly throwing feints. He's constantly throwing stuff, even if he doesn't really intend for it to do anything. He's constantly giving you a look. Yeah. And it can be very hard for someone. You've seen guys crack under that pressure. Max Holloway had looked at times very much like the better fighter through their first two fights, but he just couldn't do it anymore in that third fight, and he got pummeled because of it.
Yeah.
The Korean Zombie. I mean, that was a tough one to watch. A guy that's as good as the Korean Zombie, who by the end was so defeated.
Yeah.
Brian Ortega had moments of looking like maybe he could get it done, but then when he had that victory kind of taken out of his hands, you could tell, and again, very defeated.
Yeah.
Islam Makhachev is masterful at exposing people's weaknesses, at taking advantage of people's weaknesses. But what is he going to do when he goes up against a guy who has none?
That question. Oh, I already see the social media clip for tomorrow, no, because the way you just worded that was absolutely awesome. But it's so true. Volkanovski, and again, it goes back to me talking about his fight IQ. Every fight, we're seeing a guy not only improve, he's improving leaps and bounds, Noah. He's in his prime, 34, Islam 31 in his prime. We've not been able to see Volk be severely threatened to an extent that you would imagine Islam can present to him. He was threatened against Ortega, right? Again, he was in 2 submissions. But I'm just going to go off of all these 5 title fights right here that I'm looking at on my screen. Obviously, it's a win streak for Volk. It's 120-ish minutes of fight time because I think he finished Zombie in the 4th round. It was the 3rd or 4th round. Yeah, so around 120 minutes. 1 minute of that combined, he's been not in control of the fight.
That's crazy.
Essentially, that's around what it is. Someone can fact check me down to the seconds if you want.
You might have to put 2 clips. That's a great response there too.
That's the thing. So are we going to see Islam be able to expose something we didn't know existed in Volk's game? Because he has the grappling and the strengths to do that. But if Volkanovski can strongly defend the takedowns, and this fight is on the feet, you want to talk about intrigue. Islam, and I have felt this since the Moises fight, is better striker than Khabib was. And now especially I believe that after the Oliveira fight in specific. Volk, a lot of people I've been seeing, Noah, and I've never really considered him in this category, but it's pretty true. Volkanovski is one of the best strikers in MMA and in the UFC. What's going to happen if it's on the feet? Volk is going to be 4 inches shorter, but still has a 1-inch reach advantage. Volk somehow is 5'2", not literally, but you get what I'm saying. And he has a longer reach than everyone he fights. It doesn't even make sense. So on the feet, I don't really know. I would think in my head, Islam would be able to do enough to edge him out. But then if you really take a second to think about it, I don't know if that's the case. And Volk may well be able to win the fight should it be standing for 25 minutes. But it's a tall task because I don't know if he can keep it there for 25 minutes.
This is a great point, Dom. And I don't want to set the wrong kind of, projection of what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that I'm predicting Volkanovski to win now. I'm just saying that this fight, as the days have gotten closer, 4 months ago, whatever, that was where my kind of first thoughts. And since then, I've just came around to this idea of I don't know what's going to happen. Because everybody seems to just accept the fact that Islam is going to dominate this fight. And I'm I just have a hard time seeing Volkanovski in that kind of position.
I know, right?
Is it possible? Yeah. Yes, because Islam's that damn good. But to me, what's more than likely going to happen here is you're going to have a lot of checkmates here. Just 2 guys that are so good, number 1 versus number 2, clearly the 2 best fighters in the world. And you're going to see a lot of not checkmates. What's the word where it's I can't remember. Maybe it is. It's not checkmate. It's where 2 guys, there's no more moves that one could possibly make. They have basically canceled each other out so much.
A stalemate.
The stalemate. Thank you. Yeah. That's sort of what I could see happening here. I could really see just it going to a decision, and they're I don't know who's going to win. Judges are I don't even know. You're going to see so much high-level MMA here. You're probably going to see both guys have moments of success and their kind of strengths take over at points. Probably momentum shifts each way. A question I want to raise to you, Dom. Have you considered, when you look back at other examples of this, of a guy going up another weight class in pursuit of another belt, or even not. But the biggest examples being like the Daniel Cormier going up to heavyweight, or Henry Cejudo up to bantamweight, even Amanda Nunes for the
Mm-hmm.
women, but Conor McGregor up to lightweight, all that. Have you considered what improvements? Like, I think a lot of people have recognized where Volkanovski may lack due to going up 10 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
But have you considered where he may improve going up 10 pounds? Daniel Cormier, ever known as a knockout artist at light heavyweight. What's he do when he goes up? With the slightest of punches ever, puts out Stipe Miocic.
Yeah.
I mean, just incredible.
Yeah.
So I think that has to be taken into account here, that those 10 pounds, Volkanovski may be a small guy and this and that, but you add on 10 pounds, what kind of power are we going to see from this guy who, let's not forget, was over 200 pounds at one
Yeah.
point in his life
Yeah.
and was playing rugby? Yes,
Yeah.
he's not shown to be this huge power threat at featherweight. He's typically a guy that really takes you in the deep waters, puts it on you for the entirety of the fight. But now you get the extra 10 pounds, and it doesn't sound like a lot, but we've seen reason to believe Henry Cejudo finished Marlon Moraes when he went up 10 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Conor McGregor, he was a knockout threat at featherweight and at
Right.
lightweight, so it don't
Yeah.
matter. But I could really see Volkanovski, Islam maybe being caught off guard by the power of Volkanovski and having to respect that and maybe resorting to more takedown attempts. Will they be successful? I don't know, but that's really how I could see this fight going, because Islam has made some bold claims, Dom. He said he's going to knock out Volkanovski, and I know people will just kind of say that for the, try to get some people to buy some pay-per-views or whatever, but he may be caught off guard when he goes in there and he feels the touch of Volkanovski a couple times and goes, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't the power I was expecting from a 145er.
You really just made me think there, because now I'm going to go through it. Connor went up 10 pounds, knockout. DC went up, knockout. Amanda went up, knockout. Henry went up, knockout. Okay. You know who went down and got knocked out? TJ Dillashaw, the one man that didn't go up to try and win a
Right.
belt. So you may be onto something here. Volkanovski could come in carrying more power than we've ever seen. Maybe people aren't thinking about it. I wasn't thinking about it, but now that's all I'm going to be thinking about all day Saturday until they close the cage door. Maybe, just maybe, if, like I said, he keeps it on the feet, maybe he won't even need 25 minutes of stand-up, Noah.
Yeah, it's the more we're just talking about this, the more excited it makes me. Just when you could analyze it all day, because both guys have such big strengths, but I can't necessarily say that they each have like a huge advantage over the other, because these are two of the most complete guys out there.
Yeah.
And because of that, like I said, might be a lot of stalemates here. I have no idea. I'm beyond excited for it.
Yeah.
And I hope that if there's one thing I could hope, Dom, for this fine February evening, is that maybe just one person listened to this portion, and they were like, I wasn't all that excited for the fight before, but those Joes, those below average Joes, they got me hot and bothered for this fight now. So,
And if that's you, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Let's go.
co-main event.